6 square should give white the advantage. So far we have covered the move b6, but now let us focus on the main lines. First, I want to cover the line d takes c. So black accepts the challenge. He takes the extra pawn and throws basically the challenge back to white to prove the opening advantage. Well, now after d takes c, white can of course give the check queen a4, but this is actually not recommended because black can simply play bishop to d7, queen takes c4, and bishop to c6. Notice how black managed to solve all his opening problems. The bishop is actually doing quite well in c6. He's gonna play knight b to d7, bishop e7, and castle, and really there are not that many problems anymore for black. So that's why giving the queen to a4 is not the way to fight for opening advantage, and we recommend the move bishop to g2. So here white simply follows up with his plan, temporary pawn sacrifice, and he is ready to finish his development with castle. In this position, black has several plans. He can choose the quick development, such as the moves knight c6, or challenge white in the center with the move c5, or the plan to keep the pawn on c4 for as long as possible, this quiet looking move a6, with the idea to play b5 later on. So we're going to cover these moves one by one. And first, let us look at the most tenacious way to preserve the c4 pawn, the move a6. Now notice that black spent 2 tempi in the opening, taking the pawn on c4 with d takes c and the move a6, and white in the meantime has developed all his pieces, and now white follows up with the move castle. So white only needs to develop 2 more pieces, the knight and the bishop, whereas all of black's army, except for the knight on f6, are standing still. So for the material sacrifice, white has what is called the compensation in terms of faster development. And now black plays b5, and if knight e5, he plays knight to d5. So this is the idea, to try to close up the diagonal, and now it's not so easy for white to get the pawn back. So let's take a look what could happen next. a4, so threatening a takes b because the rook on a8 is undefended. Bishop b7. Now e4. White gains control of the center. So notice that white has 2 major trumps, the center and the development. Let's see whether that's enough to get advantage if you're pawn down. So knight f6, a takes b, rook takes, bishop takes. So this is simplification on the a file, but black is still facing problems with his pieces. And now after the simple knight c3, threatening the pawn on b5, black is having some serious trouble developing. b4 runs into some problems such as queen a4 check, and if knight b to d7, then simple move knight to b5. Notice that the pawn on c4 is hanging, knight takes c7, followed by queen taking bishop is also hanging, and again black is facing some serious difficulties in the opening. So that's why black really has to resort to one defense, and the move is c6. The bishop on a8 looks kind of ugly, but black does have the extra pawn, is willing to suffer for it. So the question is, how does white, having such a big edge in development, break through? And the answer is you always look for breakthroughs in the center. And now after the move d5, the position gets a little bit sharp, but all of the variations lead to advantage for white. For example, black can simply avoid the pawn on d5 and play bishop d6 or even bishop e7. Well, just to give you an example, after bishop d6, bishop f4, castle, white can actually get huge advantage after the little combination. Knight takes f7, and now if rook takes f7, this simply loses to d takes e, the rook is hanging, and then the bishop on d6 is hanging. And if king takes f7, then black runs into the following problem. Pawn takes check, king takes bishop h3, king back, and simply e5. So again, white is gonna get the piece back and stand much better. So notice how simple things as development is already a big problem for black in this position. Now, what if black plays bishop to e7? Then here white can simply take on e6, pawn take, and play queen e2. And even though white is down a pawn, white has very, very strong initiative. For example, the pawn on e6 is chronic weakness. The bishop on a8 is almost out of the game completely. And black's pawn structure in general is really weak. So this gives white more than enough compensation for the pawn. Now you might ask, what about the exchange on d5? So the exchange on d5 again favors white. And to give you a simple idea what would happen after c takes d, e takes d, actually knight is on e5. So after c takes d, e takes d, if black recaptures with the pawn, knight takes b5, this creates some serious problems for black. And to show you what I mean, for example, if black plays knight c6, white has immediate punishment for black. And this is all forced from now on. So knight takes pawn. So it looks as though white is simply giving up a piece. But after pawn takes c4, white has this unbelievable quiet move, which Rybka really likes, bishop to f4. And it turns out that no matter what black does, he's gonna end up in a bad position. For example, after queen takes d1, this knight c7 move is very strong. Move in between it's called. King e7, and now rook takes d1. So bishop on a8 is hanging. And if bishop to b7, let's say, then after bishop d6 check, king d8, white gets back the piece. So you can see that bishop takes f8 check, king takes c7, and bishop takes g7. Rook has to move, white is going to get the knight on f6, two bishops, and black position collapses completely. So this is completely winning for white. So as you see, the move a6, which with the idea to try to defend the pawn on c4, runs into some trouble because you're simply neglecting the development of your pieces.